This is the entire compilation released on YouTube of me painting every miniature of the core box of Primal the Awakening. Partway through this journey, right after Tora mod, I decided to make second versions of these videos where I go more in depth on my painting process for those of you that are actually interested. Therefore, all those exclusive tutorials are located on my Patreon. The first video I started that with is the Digarax, so pretty much every video after the Digarax on this channel that you see that involves some sort of creation or miniature painting, I've started making second versions of going into that process. So if you're more interested in that side of things, it's open to members of all levels over on Patreon, or if you just want to support the channel and what I do, you can go there as well. And now, without further ado, let's take a look at all these beautiful giant boss monsters of Primal the Awakening, and of course, the hunters as well. Greetings and welcome back, monster lovers. Today we'll be painting Veraxen of Primal the Awakening. Veraxen is a dragonoid type of fire-breathing monster in this boss battling game. You may have seen my other painting of Jearos, a T-Rex-ish, dinosaur-ish looking monster, which was also from this game. As with that one, I want to give him a secondary sort of lighting from behind him, although here I want to go with a blue, whereas with Jearos I kind of went with more of a turquoise color representing a jungle behind him. But because of how Veraxen is first presented in the lore in this board game, I do want him to appear during the day and upon, say, a more rocky surface. So my plan for the backlighting is to be a bit more bluish, but certainly not too overpowering of a color. So I started by airbrushing sort of the main coverage colors, which is the red and the tannish color that falls upon his wings. After that, I started working out and blocking out his horns and the shapes there, after which I proceeded to do some more edge highlighting on those horns as well as the forefront of his fleshy areas. At this point, while away from the miniature, I wanted to organize my thoughts and how I'm going to approach this monster with color, so next time, with my limited painting time, I can more purposely approach the paint job, without having my mind bothered with what to do next and contemplating which areas I've finished and which areas I have to go back to and back and forth on and stuff like that. So I decided to plan it all out, and basically here's how it proceeds. The next move was to take advantage of the airbrush and run some burgundy on the ground, then cover that with brown and the gray for the stone main area that he's posturing off of. Upon this, also add a small yellow warm area, which will be from the glow of his neck, and then proceed to cover the wings with the light tan, which will follow up on his belly front as well. I also followed up the wings with a little bit of wash to darken the folds a little bit more. Then I went back and sprayed more brighter red on only certain of the forefront body parts, mainly the face and the neck and the shoulders, and then finished off the airbrush usage with the cool blue backlighting. At this point, it returned all back to brushwork for me, starting back on the wings and adding those patterns, placing down a darker red first and then the lighter within, leaving for darker outline edges. After that, I filled in the deep crevices on his neck with a strong white, as well as within its mouth. Then I followed that with a yellow for the hot fire and its glow. Then I continued on all the red areas, the flesh areas, the scale areas with edge highlighting with brighter reds. Then I continued the same, doing edge highlighting on the tan areas, on the wings and lower body front. And continued the edge highlighting onto the horns and bringing some of those forms back out. And as an ending point, I dropped down to the ground and pulled out those grays, browns, and some warm yellowish tones from that slight glow that he'd have from his mouth and neck, and possibly the fires that he has blown ahead of him. Although these yellowish fire highlights were not my goal here, not to overcome the visual of the creature, as I wanted the contrast to shine there from the brightness of those crevices and from the inside of his mouth to the shadows that it creates upon his neck to give those reds that deep, velvety, wonderful red. And then last but not least, I finished off with the basing around with a black covered with a gloss varnish, as this will be a nice area of handling of this creature, as well as a bit of glossiness to draw attention to the aspects of that base. I was also considering, and I might still do it, I'm not sure, but I would recommend it, is if you're not planning on putting on varnish, but you are planning to have this as a playable piece as I am, instead of display more, then running some matte or satin varnish on the outside most ridges of the wings, as that's often where you're probably going to be picking up and handling this big miniature from, at least until you get your hand to that bottom of the base where you have the thicker varnish at. My paint quality here was for game readiness, but a little bit above, and I did lose myself there within it a little bit, as these are joint paint, but with some other paint strategies here, I also got to save some time, and so it's certainly not as premium as I'd want it to be for the ultimate display, but I certainly feel that it's got more going on that it really has to be a piece on the table. With big minis like this, there's always so much more you can do, and grab the smaller brush out and keep going. But as I'm going to be working on these, I have to remind myself that these are for the tabletop. And well, there's more in that box waiting for me. Let me know your thoughts, and if you're playing a game, let me know which monster you would like me to paint up next, preferably which sort of starting ones. I already have a couple in mind, but maybe you can nudge me a little more toward one of them. If you haven't seen the previous paint job of Jearos, I'd love it if you'd check it out and let me know which paint approaches and styles, or ultimately paint jobs, did you prefer, Veraxen or Jearos. Welcome. Today we'll be working on some monster hunters from Primal, The Awakening, an awesome boss battler type of board game. And as far as my process here goes, or in general, especially with minis I work on board games, I don't want to get the right effect done within a timely manner, as I like a certain ambiance of lighting on them. So I like to apply a gradient, and I like to work everything in a sort of gradient from bottom upward. Now that I have an airbrush, I can apply another base coat. Otherwise, I just do it by brush. Maybe in that case, I'd vary it with 2 different colors rather than just one, as I don't want to switch off with the airbrush as much. So there's some benefit with the brush, but then there's the benefit of airbrush with the speed and the gradient. But the gradient at this point doesn't really matter, as you're going to be going over with other colors anyway. So the way I like to start, I know often miniature painters like to start with the face, as that's the focal point and all that. I've realized that, especially for game ready quality, I like to start at the bottom. I actually do the face around the ending. But when I'm working on larger monsters and such, and larger maybe scale miniatures, then I do like to start with that face. So I think a lot of content creators that are miniature painters do start with the faces, because they often use bigger models. They often showcase busts and larger scale. And that's also for you beginners out there curious why their paint jobs are always so amazing. It's because they're using larger scale models. A lot of them, but not all of them. There's really awesome painters out there that do use smaller scale and they still look amazing. But next time you're watching the miniature painter, be sure to pay attention to what scale model they're using. Like these guys right here, they're your basic 28 to 30 millimeter scale. So I like to start from bottom up because I start with the darkest and move my colors and brightness going upward, the topmost of the miniature being the brightest. So I like to set the grounds with the darkest colors, and that's why I start with the boots and stuff and get those tones down, and as I work upward, apply more color, more layers, more brightness, and details as well, as they will be more visible in brighter areas. Another aim I had here for myself as well is to keep these game ready and not to overdo them and spend too much time on them. I am using a brush that probably, as you've noticed, it doesn't have the greatest tip, and I know this is sped up so it's hard to see, but slow it down and you'll see that this brush really lost a sharp tip. But that doesn't matter. So if you're worried that your brush isn't sharp enough or that you really need a sharp brush, I mean, most of the paint jobs on these 4 miniatures was done with quite a dull per se brush, but it's also dependent on the quality of brush. This is still a real hair brush or fur. So I decided to go as far as I possibly could with this brush so that I can get through everything quicker, because I knew if I go to the thinner, high detail, tiny brushes, then it will extend my work time and I don't need it at this quality level. I didn't end up pulling out the detail one until I started working on their faces at the end. Also, my process of working through these was by color. So first I'm going to look at which color am I using and apply it to every miniature as I go. So basically browns and tannish browns and such I already had on my palette from a previous paint job, and they worked for the boots and pants and such, so I started with those browns and then proceeded with grays and yellows. So basically going by color and then working through each miniature rather than spending all the time on one miniature to finish. I do it by what paint I have available and work through the 4 of them. So if you're batch painting, that's basically how I would go about it. And I think if you're watching videos out there, that's what a lot of painters are doing. It makes sense with the process. It keeps things interesting too as you're switching between models, and it makes sense with the paint that's always in a drying process. After I get the main colors done, then I pull out those colors that are specific to the different characters. So you got your reds, the greens, the purple, the blues and such. And that's pretty much it. As far as the metallic and shininess, I personally, even though it would still be much quicker and for some people more appealing to use true metallic metal paints, I still prefer this non-metallic metal style. I just feel for me it's more dramatic, and for me, to my eye, it's more pleasing, it's more satisfying. I feel it requires more skill, and even though I'm not pushing it to get it done really well in the blending, because that can really take a long time, and this is already taking more time than just applying a nice shiny coat of true metallic paints, it still really shows off that skill level. And I think because of that, it's also more dramatic, and it gives you a chance to really practice non-metallic metal without going crazy on time on one miniature, but rather spending a little time here and there, and already your skill is getting up. So when you do want to apply a smooth blend and try to get non-metallic metal right on a model that you want display quality, you'll already have built up some skill without suffering through those countless hours of trying to get it perfect. This little bit in practice of non-metallic metal is really useful in honing your skill, and it goes a long way when developing yourself as a painter. Oh, and as a final note, I did also apply the gradient on the ground. Usually I leave the whole bases black, but if they have some terrain, as these ones do, I made sure to make a gradient not going upwards, as that's not very possible since it's such a short range of distance in that direction, but rather going in the gradient to the back. And in general, I do leave things a little darker on the backs of even these smaller miniatures as well, but it's not quite as drastic as you'd see with the bigger ones. And of course, I leave a black edge on the bases and apply some glossy varnish for that to make them nice and shiny just at that area, as I like the look, but also glossy varnish is typically more protective than, say, matte varnishes. So it's a win-win for me in that case. Anyhow, with that, here's the grand monstrous reveal. Of course, they're not monsters, but they are quite monstrous, as you do have to be if you are hunting giant monsters out there. Usually I don't talk about my process or offer advice, as I don't think my viewers really watch these for that, but you know, sometimes there's new viewers or different viewers, or maybe someone will catch something here or there that particularly speaks to them. Greetings, today we'll be painting Ozu of Primal the Awakening. Starting this guy out with a backsplash of purple, and then starting with the green in the front, as it's mostly going to be a green creature, and so I want that aura started. Why did I choose purple in the back? Because of the concept art, it features that color. What I like to do with I do like when there's concept art, and I do like to follow concept art. If the concept art is a little weak on colors or the saturated, I make sure to oversaturate it in my head and push those colors on the model, especially if I'm looking for a higher level, more time consuming paint job. So like as far as this guy's head, it's kind of whitish, but I wanted a warm sort of undertone, hence I started with the orange. As for the wings, I wanted that sort of translucent, dirty look, you know, that swampish, kind of cloudy look of the wings. The green I started with here ultimately was already on the palette. Oftentimes I will start with something that's on the palette already if it matches sort of what I have in my head. If it doesn't work out, then I'll go with something else, but usually I'll make it work out, or just will, as I'm gonna use that color anyway. So in this case, I did want to use that color, and then I applied a more saturated, different kind of green on top of that, and kind of blended it out with that turquoise sort of green that was from the airbrush, and then top that off with this more lime green for the highlights, spots and such, and definitely using it sort of conservatively, more on the edges, the spikes, little nubs and bits, and certainly not using it on the other side. As for going back to his head, I wanted this saturated a bit, as that was a strong orange color, and so I applied a tannish gray on top of that with another highlight of a lighter gray. And then I started on those eggs. I painted them purple and then applied a lighter purple on top, then dark purple spots in the back, and then shine brightest purple or almost white spots facing the top or more toward the front. I went back to those translucent side underwings and did some more edge work there to kind of sell that idea. Then I went to his horns where his lightning electric bolts are working through. That is this creature's power is electricity. I did those with a strong white and then highlighted with a yellow to disperse that. And then I went to work on the ground. I usually do that last with these guys. I added some kind of moss swampish greens on there as well, as it appears the landscape has some of that, and then mostly just browns for the dirt. As for other coverings, I don't usually apply varnishes anywhere on the models, even for my game pieces lately, except for on the base edges and such. But here I wanted this guy a little bit more glossy, as it is an insect that does have a hard, somewhat shiny chitin on it. And so I actually applied a Vallejo matte varnish on his main areas, as even though it says matte, it is more glossy, so it leaves sort of a satin finish. So I guess if you're interested, pay attention to that finish at the end for the final turn. As far as for a high gloss, I did apply a high gloss to the eggs to sell those as extra wet and shiny, as well as his little eyes. And I believe his main abdomen part under his wings, I left that a bit more glossy, and also that little river, that stream running underneath him. And of course, again, the base edges. When it says matte varnish, don't believe it. It's rarely going to be more matte than your quality acrylic paints. As you can see here, you can clearly see how matte they are looking at the ground here. It's nice and flat looking and more dusty, which is perfect with this guy. While he looks a bit more satin, sort of eggshell shininess, and then there's parts like the eggs. I believe also his joints, those have a high gloss finish. And the high gloss is also Vallejo gloss varnish. I do actually have quite a matte varnish that I purchased in search of the mattest of varnishes, and it is one of the most mattest out there. It's certainly the mattest, the one that I have, and that is the one from Green Stuff World. So if you want a nice matte varnish to pull out your colors or original tones, I recommend it. But if you want the truest of your paint colors and such, don't apply a varnish. But as you may know, some paints are more glossy than others, or if you don't mix them up enough or such, so it's not a bad idea to apply such a matte varnish to a model with a mix of such shiny and non-shiny paint finishes, and it'll sort of balance out everything. And then wherever you want it to be more shiny, you can of course apply a gloss varnish on top of the already matte varnished areas. Hope you enjoyed this. I am playing through the game, hence you may be seeing more of these guys lately here. Greetings and welcome to World of Monsters. Today we're working on Tora of Primal the Awakening. This is a desert-dwelling, giant head-bashing, tail-clubbing desert monster. The way I started with this guy is with this sandy khaki airbrush spray from the front and an orange spray coming from the back to sort of give a warm glow of the desert around, maybe a sunset feel. And then I'm going to proceed to start with the reds that come out from the crevices of its head. And by the way, it has recently come to my attention as I got a new patron that is actually interested in this sort of content. And that's not something I've been optimizing my Patreon in that direction of, as I was doing more monster lore stuff, and now I'm sort of doing half, if not more, of this more hobby-oriented monstrous stuff. So if you do find an interest for this sort of content, I'm thinking up some ideas of what I can present on the Patreon and where I can go more in depth on sharing my knowledge of miniature painting. Professionally, I am a digital sculptor, but as far as miniature painting, that's something I got into back as a kid in the 90s and deeper back into at around 2018 or so. So that's a little about that. And back to Tora here, I started with some, shall we say, edge highlighting of a different bright color, a gray to sort of break out his stone appearance, and then I followed that up with a brighter highlight in the same direction, not being too creative with the color mixes thus far, and I don't think overall on this model. After I covered the rest of him with the highlights, focusing on the front being the brightest and toning it down going toward the back, I think I mixed up, or I found an old wash. I probably mixed one up. I haven't actually been purchasing many washes as I haven't been using washes much, and if I need them or a glaze, I simply make it on hand. And so I'm using a sort of wash here to fill in some crevices between the textures, to break them out and to add some interest to the model so it's not just a grayish, khaki-ish, sandy looking beast, but to give him some areas of more interest and a little bit of dynamic color flow. After that, I moved on to the stones below, color-wise taking them away from what we have going on so far, making them purple in tone. I added the highlights on the fronts as well, everything focused on the front, after which I returned to the head for some final brightest of highlights. Considering I didn't change the hues too much on this guy, the tricky thing and what may be a little bit more dull within this approach is that I'm just going brighter and brighter, sort of with the same hue, which does become a challenge because nothing of the color sticks out except being brighter, and at this point it's pretty much just white. And that's not usually a color I want to actually end with as far as a highlight. but being as it is with its tones and wanting to really pull the brightness out, that's where I ended up going on the head. After that, I returned to the rocks, applying the final highlights on those, and then starting on that cracked up ground, where I'm having a little bit of freehand fun, applying the khaki color, on top of which I apply a brighter highlight color in the same vein, the same sort of level of warmth, maybe a little bit cooler, but also freehanding it so it can really stand out and give the ground that other dimension and contrast. And then the final area of work on this guy goes back to his back where we have the orange Mars tones, and I highlight those with another layer of orange. And then again, not getting too creative with the colors, going with just a much brighter tone in the same vein, keeping it nice and simple, everything flowing smooth and working together and being more or less predictable. And as with all my models, I finished the basing edges with black, followed by a couple layers of gloss varnish. So you can handle that base all you want, and so it just stands out with the glossiness to the flatness of the rest. And I gotta say that this guy looks extra satisfying being totally matte, as it just all fits that environment really well. So all in all, I got this guy done in a rather timely manner. If you're not particularly particular about certain intricacies of the model and the textures it has all over its hide, you could just simply go dark, lighter gray, or khaki or whatever, and dry brush, going further away and away from the recesses, going brighter and brighter. At this point, dry brushing is something I do not do. If the closest thing I do would be edge highlighting, which at that point they cross over and become one thing. But the reason is that dry brushing will still create this sort of brushed, messy, dry sort of look. Of course, you can make it look better, but I definitely like to be more intentional. Even if the final product looks very similar to what it would have looked dry brushed, I still feel more satisfied with the process, even though it will take longer. But I think to the, should I say, experienced eye, these little subtle details and such will be noticeable, and it's just a good habit to build. Anyway, hope you enjoyed how Tora here turned out, and this narration of me going back and talking over the process. I've been thinking about going away from it, but now I'm sort of motivated to go back and talking more about the process and making extra content for those of you that may seek it, where I can expand on the depths of my approach and maybe give you some feedback as well if you'd like it. Thanks for watching. If you own Primal the Awakening, you might want to check out this other video of another monster from the game that I painted, or one of these fun one-on-one monster battle videos that I've been getting into lately. Welcome back to World of Monsters, Everything Monster. Today we're painting up this giant monster of Primal the Awakening called the Digarax. It is a desert dweller, and some of his fighting abilities are flapping his big giant wings over the desert sands, reshaping the desert as we know it. I haven't hit this monster quite yet in my battling in the game, but as a paint scheme he came up as I airbrushed the same base colors on him as I did with the Tora. Although with this guy I then applied a deep red sort of wash because I knew that I'm going to want his scales purple, so I wanted a better basing for that. Working on every scale in the purple color and keeping the saturation more to the front. I also then highlighted the scales, and after having all that done, proceeded to work on the khaki color for the hornage action going about the creature. After rendering the horns to almost completed level, I didn't apply the final highlights on them just yet. I went to work on the wings, applying orange, working a gradient from top to bottom, more saturated, brighter to darker at the bottom. Then I returned to the horns, highlighting them. After that, I went to the back where we have the orange sunset brightness on the creature and started highlighting everything popping out from that side. So the horns, the scales, the wings, the rocks from that angle, but all in that same orange hue. After that, I returned to the khaki ground, where I washed it down real quick to make it darker and then started applying a red to give it more warmth, to make everything feel like a more hot environment overall. After being done with that red application, I applied a brown then to start to return back to those earthy tones, which then would be covered with the khaki color, and after that, highlighted. All these hues and tones working together to create a nice three-dimensional, interesting color effect of what could just be a very boring, sandy, muddy, or deserty ground. At the end, I went back to his face and worked on the details of his mouth and eyes and teeth, and as always, finishing the base with black and glossing that up so it makes for easier and safer handling of the miniature. And now for the monstrous reveal. Let me know what you like about this paint job approach and what you didn't like. What would you do differently? What do you think would have worked better on this monster? Greetings, monster lovers. Today we're painting up Corawan here, a giant crab-like monster from Primal the Awakening. As with the previous models of this game, I prime it in black and then airbrush it from the front with a khaki color. You can also do this by brush. You don't need an airbrush. And then to give it more of that underwater feel, I did a secondary color from the back in blue. After that, I applied the next highlight on top of that khaki front, and then went back with a quick made wash to fill in some crevices and pull out some details. After that, I work up some highlights on the different parts of the model and start on the corals, which are going to be sort of turquoise, and the other group purple, with the shell ending up in green. And this is me following the concept art colors. Now, I did get a chance to fight this monster and beat him in the game, and he's fun. He does grab you, the claws can capture you, which pulls your hunter out of the fighting sequence for a little while, and he does do a sort of heal or resistance thing, and then I guess I'm not going to spoil what armor and weapons do if you're going to craft those out of its anatomy after destroying it, as this is kind of like Monster Hunter. But I mean, I kind of gave it away. He does have a sort of healing factor, and there's this sort of supernatural, other than it just being a giant crazy monster, set of abilities there to it. So all in all, I'm going to say as far as fighting this monster, it was surprisingly tougher, and it kind of woke you up. Its health goes down pretty smoothly, but when it bashes you and gets offensive, it really kind of smacks you right in the face and wakes you up and makes you realize, okay, let's hurry up and destroy this thing, because every time it gets unruly, we suffer greatly. It was a fun, yet somewhat tense monster to battle, realizing that quickly and early in the fight. But as far as this model goes, I simply love it. I love that you can play with a lot of colors with this because of the reefs and such growing upon him, and the patterns that you can create and such. This again being a model for gaming in the board game. I didn't go nuts with going overboard with colors and detail and things like that, just making sure it will look awesome on the tabletop, as a lot of its time will probably be spent maybe in a display somewhere, but possibly back in the box. And it will be handled as well, as it is a game piece, so I try to balance out my work on these guys following those thoughts. Let me know what you think of this monster. Again, it certainly is one of my favorites from the monsters of the core box of Primal the Awakening. And now the monstrous reveal. Greetings and welcome back, monster lovers and new viewers that have made it to the video. Today we're painting the Taragua of Primal the Awakening, this big boss monster that I have a feeling has terrible eyesight, but has great form for dealing damage in front and from behind. This is my speed paint per se of this creature, as it's not the full paint process time-lapsed, but clips of the entire paint process time-lapsed. And each clip is taken to represent the different color that I'm applying. So going from the first brushed red highlight onto the purple, white, and so on and so forth. I'm dealing with this crazy creature right now in the game, and it is not something to take lightly. As I said, he has that sort of hammer-headed tail that he swipes about, so being right behind him is treacherous. But then again, being in his flank areas on the sides can also be quite unsafe as well. There's really not any side that's particularly safe with this guy. As you see with that swinging tail, he's pretty much just offense everywhere, built on top of powerful defense, as it is structured of, I believe, iron, or at least the armor that you craft out of it is metallic. So it's an extremely durable beast that's both very hardy and very angry, as all of these giant primal monsters seem to be. In the end, the whole mystery is to find out why they have come into this world and why they are such a ferocity that they are. How this guy was a little bit different to paint was that from the concept art, we don't get much color suggestions throughout his body. It's basically a solid sort of range of colors all over equally, which is kind of fun because you get to pick out where do you want the warmth and the coolness to fit in. And then, as always with these guys and with my miniatures overall, is my approach of setting sort of a spotlight front side lighting to them where you get more detail, more contrast, and more brightness from the front of the miniature, getting darker and duller going back, with or without a secondary highlight coming from behind. As with this guy, we do have that, and I just kept that as a pretty solid bone white, as my goal with these is to make them look as good as possible to get that effect in and to get them done with a decent amount of time. So if you're looking to spend 4 to 5 hours, maybe 6, then hopefully these videos can help with that. And if you are watching these to learn more or develop more as an artist in this field, then I have started making a second version of these videos that I put on Patreon for people that are interested in that. That's a new thing, but I feel that's something that people might appreciate, and that's not something I want to push on the channel, as it really is World of Monsters. So I want to showcase the monster first and foremost, rather than going into more in-depth tutorials on the artistic process and such. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I definitely think you should check out the game, even if you don't want to buy it, just so you can see the tasty creatures in it. If you like Monster Hunter, well, this is Monster Hunter Tabletop, basically. Hope you enjoyed this beastie, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one, which might just be this video, which YouTube thinks for some reason you may enjoy. today we're working on Huram here. And Huram is a giant monster, a metallic dragonoid, wingless, but still considered dragonoid with metallic-like scales. And so when you defeat this creature, that's the element that you can use to craft armor and different weapons. I haven't fought against it yet in the game, but from tidbits I've gained here and there, it appears to be quite a difficult or powerful creature. These monsters are attracted to archaeum, this magical, powerful substance, and I believe they even work with it. But anyhow, with my take here on Huram, it's as the usual with these large board game miniatures. I want to put focus from the front and make them ready for game and display, but in a timely manner, as I don't want to spend all day on each one, as there are many of them. But I also don't want them to look too plain. I want them to have this dramatic effect. With Huram here, I gave him a whitish, it's actually a gray highlight from the back, a spotlight. If you are more interested in this aspect of these creatures, the painting up aspect, I have been making more in-depth videos discussing my process and offering tips here and there. It doesn't matter at what level you join, you will have access to these videos. I believe this is the 5th one, as it is a somewhat new thing, but I know some of the viewers showed interest. If you're indeed an enthusiast of fantastical creatures, I recommend checking out all the other boss monsters here, as you don't need to play the game to appreciate the wonderful monsters that they are. Greetings! Today I'm working on the Taragua here, another rather giant monster of Primal the Awakening. Now, the monsters here are quite elemental or sort of specific material based, but the Taragua is as elemental representative as a monster can be. This creature is truly, literally born of the fires. It's an extremely deadly creature, having some properties of a feline in appearance. It is a quadruped and roughly, not including the upraised tails, a good 20 plus feet in length. And so in addition to those feline features, it has tusks on its face. Its claws aren't retractable. What's the point of that? At this point, when you're a fiery fiend of a monstrosity, its tails end in not fluffy bits, but in rather spiky, melty, hot, molten flame bits. Its somewhat fur is flame, and once it forms its tangible body, lava seeps through all the cracks, as within the heart of it. That's what it seems to be. Anyway, as with all the primal monsters, my focus was from the front, and from the back end, I gave it that nice glow from the hot embers surrounding it within its lair. It's hard to even say its lair, as it basically is a literal part of its lair. It's a very cool creature, and I quite enjoyed painting it. One of my favorite to paint, I think, thus far within the game. And if your interest here is more on my take on the painting style, on my approach, I do have a more detailed video of that on my Patreon, where I've been putting those more art-focused and technique-focused videos. You're welcome to watch them there at any member level. But with that and this, do let me know What do you think of the Karja here? Which of these monsters of, let's talk specifically, Primal the Awakening, did you find the most fascinating design-wise? As we don't know that much in depth on their lore, and some of them I think may not have that deep of a lore, but just as far as their colors and overall anatomical features, which has most tickled your fancy? Greetings, monster lovers. I have a kaiju-ish sort of creature for you today. This is the Jearos of Primal the Awakening. Let's explore it a little bit, and if you are indeed more interested in my paint-up process of it, I have a more detailed video on that on my Patreon, which is available at all levels. I just put it there to keep content on this channel more focused, more purely monster-oriented. Now, whether you know this game, care about it or not, or this style of gaming, that doesn't matter, because this is about the monster. We gotta praise the monsters out there that artists put so much work on. So anyway, Jearos is one of the big boss monsters of this game, and it is lightning based. The different creatures there have a certain element that they are of, and so this is one of the ones that are the element, shall we call it, of lightning. It represents uncontrollable energy and wrath. Apparently its blood holds fragments of the world's forgotten history. And all this mysteriousness going on since the release of all these creatures onto the world. Jearos appears not to have any eyes and has layers of spines and plates lining down its back, all the way down its tail to a final blade plate. It has a very long tail that appears to be very dangerous at first sight, as does the tip of its head, which is just as, if not sharper. It has big, dangerous claws on both its legs and its arms, and it features possibly a vulnerable spot right in front of its chest. A large beating heart. I told you, this creature is just full of heart. Personally, I haven't fought this guy yet. I have fought the Ozu, which is a lightning-based beetle, giant beetle creature. I guess my only suggestion at this point would be watch out for the pointy bits as well as those pointy bits from lightning. So you may be safer spreading out and moving about as you make your attacks. One of my favorite features of this creature is the overall wormy silhouette with that long tail, and then that face. The beautiful face only a mother could love, without eyes, but with the big gaping jaws, and the huge spike growing off the would-be nostril area. It gives it a bit more mystery and a bit more character. Is there anything you would change about its appearance? Do you like this design? Do you find it uninspiring? Do you find it very relatable to the kaijus of the movies you've seen out there? Now let me just put this down right now, because if you do like the kaiju-ish aspect of it, I think you're going to be in for a nice little surprise. Or should I say gigantic surprise from what will be the next featured monster after this. I think you'll find it very reminiscent of a well-known beastie out there. And if that video is already out there, you better rush out and find it right now before it gets lost in this clutter of the internet that so controls us. Greetings, monster lovers. Today we'll be exploring Morcross, this quite formidable giant boss monster, the one of many of Primal the Awakening. Game and all that aside, let's just talk about the monster for what it is. It's clearly very reminiscent of a particularly famous monster out there, and let's see if I can do this whole video without referring to its name. But this creature here is described as a crystal mountain. Now obviously it's quite smaller than a mountain, but because of its form and its size and all the crystals lining its back, when you see it rise from a plateau, it's like a hill of crystals coming to life. It is massive, and that reflects through its power. It may be slow, but its crushes are punishing. As far as my painting of it goes, it is a dark creature. It's essentially black, and with blacks we can have fun. Now, as far as my highlights, as I do like to present a certain focal point and highlight, or main light, a strong main light, almost a spotlight, coming from the front. On this creature, I almost exaggerated it, and I found it gave him a certain character, and it made it stand out from a distance because of the brightness of the front-facing areas, such as the tail tip, the muzzle, and clawed arms. I'm actually battling this guy in-game right now. I'm at the very start of it, so there aren't any spoilers or real reveals I have for you here, but watch out for this creature building up struggle, as that can essentially allow it to squash you with overwhelming force. So be quick, be on your toes, and adapt fast to its environmental manipulation and any such techniques. As my strategy has been throughout the game thus far, I'm gonna just try to apply as much damage as fast as possible to it as I can while simply staying alive. Let's see if that works out or if I'll have to change that up. But anyway, being a representative creature of the crystal sort of element material in the game, this is a very neat approach to that and the idea. It's quite different than the previous crystal creature that I encountered and that I've painted on here, the other one in the core box, as that one was very swift and seemingly, well, warm-blooded, while this is cool-blooded, enormous, and possibly almost sluggish in appearance. But let's see how that goes. It's got a thick armored hide, and I'm gonna have to figure out how to best pierce through all that. Or maybe I'll find it best to break through and shatter the crystals throughout its back. But whatever way I'll find it, and we'll beat this beautiful, deadly monster to the ground. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this paint-up of it. And if you're interested in a more detailed look at how I painted it, I do have that available on Patreon to members at all levels. Plus, we can chit-chat more in depth over there on painting techniques and such, if you are interested in that. Otherwise, I welcome you to more monstrous content here on World of Monsters. Enthusiasts of creatures great and small, we have reached the final, I don't even want to say boss here because it seems like such a weak word for this. This is the Awakened, the largest monster, the largest dragon, the most powerful creature of Primal the Awakening, the core box and campaign. What I have for you here is an amalgamation of speed paint portions of what took me roughly 8 hours to come up with this not only game-ready quality of paint job, but display as well. That's been my goal with all these monsters of Primal the Awakening and of any board game miniatures that I've painted, is to not just have nice looking miniatures for your board game, but if you do want to put them up on a shelf somewhere, they're good enough to deserve that spot as well. But we're also not talking about spending too much time and fully rendering each miniature to your topmost ability. Of course, that might be something that you want to do, but with these ones that I've displayed, my goal has been to get to the best look or most dramatic effect on these miniatures within a decent amount of time. And usually it's been about 5 to 7 hours. This guy, of course, took more time, as just look at it. This is literally the largest actual miniature that I have painted, and I did want to give it the honor it deserved. I usually search the miniatures that I'm going to paint online to look up other paint jobs of it so I can get a better understanding of the colors that should be applied to it, especially with this guy since there's little information on that within the game, but also for some inspiration and to see what direction I want to go with. And to be honest, looking this guy up, being the main final monster of the game, I couldn't find very inspired work out there. Not much more inspired than just taking an airbrush, hitting a few points, maybe cleaning it up with a brush here and there, and that's about it. So being in a way inspired by that in itself and having to balance him with all the rest of the monsters I've already done of the game, I did want to make sure I give it the effort that it should get, being the scale and because of the lore of it within the game. I am definitely not a long-time user of the airbrush, is more of a new thing to me. With these, I really only use it at the start of my paint jobs. Once I get those base layers down and the direction, which is an important key factor with these miniatures, really, the direction of the flow of the paint and saturation. After that, the brushwork is where all the meat really takes place. If I were to spend more time and do pure display or competition level, then I could bring out the airbrush back and forth here. But you can always get the same effect with paint and watering it down. It'll take longer. It might not be exactly the same, but it'll be along the same lines. The different thing I did with this monster is that, as with all the other Primal monsters, I did give them a highlight from the back. Very simple, very plain and tone variety, but with this one I decided not to do that so I can conserve the time, as I'm on a time budget here. If you're not in my more depth tutorial, I will bring up sometimes where you can spend more time. Those are on my Patreon, open to any level of member, but with the Awakened here I decided not to have any highlight color so I can spend more time on the front and the main details, leaving the back of it not highlight in any color but just going all the way to darkness. I did a little bit of different highlight or color work to the sides of it, starting with a blue, but ultimately all the color, all the flesh of the life comes into and from the front of it, which is the whole illusion that we're trying to create with this style, because it's a very dramatic approach to painting miniatures in which it can save you time from other areas if you don't have that time, and if you're still learning, you can apply and spend more time in smaller, more direct areas without burning out. And I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people burn out or get to a point where they just don't know what to do next, and really their miniatures sort of look unfinished. I think a big difference between high quality painted miniatures out there and not are the amount of time and effort added to those better ones. And with this approach of the light kind of heading from the front of it, we're concentrating the workflow for yourself to keep it more interesting and creating a smaller time frame for work for you as well. This creature, this design, was a blast to work on. Very awesome details from the scales on the belly to the many horns on its head. It was awesome to work, and I did make a longer tutorial. I've been doing those more in-depth explanations to my painting process on the Patreon, since I've already had the Patreon, and before it wasn't about just painting, but since this channel isn't just about painting monsters, it's about monsters in general, I want to make sure that I have a more concentrated place on that info if people are interested in getting it, and that's why I also offer those videos and that help to all levels. Now then, I haven't gotten to this monster yet in the game. I'm almost there. I'm nearing the completion of this campaign, but if you've already fought him, can you give me any advice? I'd monstrously appreciate it.